Okay. That it didn't say that. Okay. But what does the 6 years mean? That at the 7th year, that his own 6 years? It doesn't mean the 6 years of the world 6 years. Yeah, that was our question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they belong to Reverend.
I was just saying there was 2 books, 2 Rambam books, and then but so the beginning was the first page.
Nice.
I'll move over chair because Hilo always sits here. I need him because he tells me they will have to just move one up.
Special mention, Jasper is here. Telling Chaim times on
the best morning.
Morning time.
A little bit behind.
Dr. Stein's going to help me today. I couldn't figure out the Gemara.
Don't worry.
I came
everything's
early
in
to look up
machlokas.
in the other, we have a Sifta commentary.
It's always in machlokas. You don't find it, they switch.
You have to know what the Machleka says. Okay. Okay. Ready? I'm a rabbi. We're going to start today, Lamed Chesem at Beis, and it's in the middle of the page. I'm a rabbi. Lamed Chesem at Beis. That's 38b. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. And in the course of our learning, we should have Beis Mikdash immediately. Okay. I'm a rabbi. Rabbi says, I'm a Rav. Rabbi says in the name of Rav, Hamakdish Avdi, someone that consecrates the slave. And we're talking about a slave that's a Eved Knani. Rav says, Yatzal Acheres, the slave goes free. That's okay. Rabbi could say in the name of Rav. It's really Rav Huna, and is Rabba under Rav Huna and under Rav Chisda? No.
Rav Huna,
and Ren and Rabba. Rabba and Rav Chisda is a contemporary.
Also
yeah.
In
Yeah. Okay. So the slave goes free because he consecrated the slave. So my time, what's the reason for this? It says Gufe like Kaddish. Obviously, the slave is not a sacrifice. We don't do human sacrifices. Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
The slave is not a sacrifice. So what becomes consecrated here? Not the body of the slave. The body, the gufa would be, if it would be a sacrifice that's going to be brought on the altar. The lidmei like Amar. He did not mention that he's just consecrating him because he wants to give his value to the temple. That he didn't say. So it must be the lehevi yam kaddish kama. When he consecrated him, it must be that he said that he meant that he's going to be holy like the Jewish people, which means that he was actually making him free, because when a slave goes free, he becomes Jewish. Follow? That expression that he's consecrating him means that he's making him holy like the Jewish people, means he's freeing him. That's Rab's view. Rav Yosef Amarav, Rav Yosef says in the name of Rav, well, okay, that was Rabba's view in the name of Rav. Rav Yosef says in the Rav and Rav Yosef are friends. It says in the name of Rav, Mafkir Rav the Yatzal Acheres. But if someone not is makdish his eved, but someone that's mafkir his eved, makdish means he consecrates. Rav Yosef says someone that makes ownerless his eved, his slave.
Makdish like Kaddish.
Yeah, consecrates.
Yeah.
But Rav Yosef says, well, when did Rav say that he goes free? That's if he's mafkir him, if he makes him ownerless. No master, no slave, right? Mandamar Makdish, the Gemara explains. Mandamar Makdish, according to the opinion of Rabba in the name of Rav, Kolskin Mafkir. If he becomes free when he makes him hektish, It's not really connected. It's just that it's, yeah, but why is it connected there? If he makes him free, but by making him hektish, it's because that's an expression of freedom, that he should be Jewish. So mafkir should also be the same thing because he doesn't have an owner. I think what the Gemara is saying is that mafkir is the more obvious one. When he's ownerless, he goes free. Really, I think the other way. Mandam or mafkir, but if you say that when you make him ownerless, he goes free. Aval makdish loy. But to come up with the chiddush that he becomes free by saying he's consecrated, that's already a chiddush. That not necessarily does Rabbi Yosef agree with. That could be just that's the opinion of Rabbah. Rabbi Yosef would disagree with that. Iboilo. I'm sorry. Well, makdish like Dilma Lidmei Kamar. Maybe he just meant that he was makdish, and maybe just meant that he's going to give his money, his value, the value of an evet to the base of English. Not that he's free. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Yeah.
What happens if
Shmuel did not require a bill of
what happens if a person can't afford to take care of them? Can he,
an evet is not so expensive.
No?
No, because he's got to be able to work off his own cost.
oh,
If he's more expensive than he can earn, then that's a pretty lousy evet. You'd probably let him free anyway.
He's old or he gets injured or he can't really earn any.
You would probably let him free.
Standing free,
Probably let him free.
then he's on the market.
Or actually, there is an opinion in the Gemara that he doesn't need to support him. The Gemara, we discussed that earlier. Is he obligated to support the other? Okay. Iboilo, they have a question in the yeshiva. Tzarech get shecher or loy tzarech? Does, when we said that we let him free, if he's makdish him or if he's mafkir him, does he have to write a deed of manumission that he's free? Just like when a woman gets divorced, you can't just say, go free. You have to give her a document to get. So too, by the evet, you can't just say, you go free. You have to give the document. Manumission? I don't know. How does it say it over there? What is it? That's by an Evet Ivri. They put a hole in there. Then we're talking about an Evet Kanani, non-Jewish slave. We're doing talking about a non-Jewish slave. It's not the Jewish slave that stole. That's what we're talking about. We bought him from the pirates. Okay. Mitzvah to write again. So the same thing here. Is there a document that's required? Well, Tashima, come and listen. Rab Chia bar Ravin Amar Rav. Rab Chia bar Ravin says the name of Rav. Echad zeh v'echad zeh. Whether this one, whether that one, it's referring to mafkir, ownerless, or makdish, consecrating. Yatzel l'cheres v'tzarech get shecher. You have to write a document. It's not enough just to say that statement. Amar Rabba says, Mesvina nashmaitin. And we have a question on our Mishnah, or our halacha. What do they say? How do they translate it? Our halacha, our brisa. Okay. Mesvinan ashmaitin. We ask on our halacha. That's what it is. Hamakdish nechasav. Someone consecrates all his possessions. Everything that I own belongs to the temple. And he had amongst them slaves, referring to non-Jewish slaves. Okay, now comes in the call them like adjusters,
yeah, you gotta consecrate something for a monetary value.
Right. So there's temple adjusters come in, and the Gizbarim, assessors, and they come in. They can't say that, okay, the slaves are going to go free. Now, how would the slaves go free? What they would do is they would sell the slaves, and the money would be
Rites
Is it-
of initiation. He's shooting at him.
the money that they see. The temple has no use for these for the property and for the slaves. They only have use for the value of it, for the money, because they have the temple upkeep. So what they would do is they would sell all the possessions that were consecrated, and with that money they would use it for the temple upkeep. They're not sacrificing houses and couches and all of whatever was there. So when they get the money for the eved, it doesn't automatically go free. And they're not allowed to set the eved free like that. They have to sell the eved to someone else. And then the other fellow can set him free. Now, what's the reason for this?
Because when you sell something, you make a contract, you make paperwork.
Says here that the treasurer cannot emancipate him. So since the temple does not own the slaves, the treasurers cannot emancipate. Therefore, not only can the treasurer not emancipate, but they receive, in other words, the Gizbar or whatever he's called, has to give the slave to somebody else and he can then sell it.
Right.
Oh, in addition to giving
Right.
the money.
The only problem with this, you see,
How
but
does he
Dr.
give it to
Steiner says how to
somebody
give it to
else?
someone else. But it says because the master that consecrated him maybe doesn't really consecrate him that he should belong to the temple. He consecrates him only that his value belongs to the temple, but the actual ownership of him never really belonged to the temple. So the temple can't emancipate him because the temple didn't really own him. They only owned like an insurance policy on him. Like it wasn't. They don't own him. They just own something that they can get for him, which is.
Why don't we go back to the previous page where we said that the reason we can have Ammon and Moab, which we normally couldn't have to work for us, is because Sichon had acquired them. Then when we, in their conquest, when we acquired Sichon, we then acquired Sichon's property on Ammon. So it's really, could be said analogously, that here, since this man gave his stuff over, even though we don't own the slaves, since we got over this stuff, we automatically got the slaves.
That was a discussion about if a non-Jew can sell a slave to someone else, and we were saying that yes, that they can, and that was
Because they owned it.
because they own
by
it.
Their acquisition.
Right. Now what's happening is we're saying when he just consecrates it, does that transfer ownership of the actual body of the slave to the bezdin, to the hektish? We're saying no. So what the hektish has to do is sell him. Now how do they sell him?
Come on.
Where
God
do you get
owns
that from?
everything that
What
he-
do you mean in Yetzu? Shashi. Oh, no. That's they sell him to someone else. That other person can set him free in Yetzu if they want. Okay, but how do they sell him if they don't really own that? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. We're about to say that. Rebbe Yomer, Rebbe says, I say, I say, the person himself can come up with the money. The slave himself can come up with the money. Now, how does the slave own anything? How does the slave own anything? Because everything that the slave owns automatically goes to the master. We're talking about a case where someone gave something to the slave. He gave it to him on condition that the master doesn't acquire it. So the slave now has his own independent bank account. The slave can go to the Gizbar and he can buy himself free. Gizbar is he can go to the Hektish. It says because it's as if he sold it to him. It's as if the Gizbar, the one who's the caretaker of Hektish, sold it to himself and then could sell him to someone else. So he could sell him to himself. And now the slave redeems himself. Yeah, it sounds like a
Because it's a
loophole.
process. You have to go to an auction, you have to sign him in, check if he has all his vaccinations. It's not just so to give it away and let them sell it is yeah.
Okay. So what we're saying here now is that when someone is makdish a slave, when someone is makdish, it consecrates a slave, according to Rav, the slave went free immediately, according to Rabbah in the name of Rav. According to this brisa, the slave does not go free. There's a whole process here, like Josh says. You have to check all of the stuff, and then you have to sell them, and then, okay, well, the Gemara, it's a contradiction on Rav. The Gemara says, Masnisin karamis ala the Rav. You're asking a question from a brisa on Rav. Rav Tanahu Palik, Rav can argue on a brisa. Rav is a generation later than Rebbe. But nevertheless, because he was considered older than the other sages, he was considered greater, transition generation, so he's able to argue on a brisa. So you can't really ask a question from a brisa on Rav. Rav has his own opinion. It's an exception to the rule of Amirayim can't argue on Tanaim. Tashema, so come and listen. It says, Ach kol chayrim. It says anything that's consecrated, that any man will consecrate from anything that he has, whether it's from a man or property. The pasuk says, Me'adam, from a man, Elu avadav shevchaisav aknanim. This is talking about his slaves and his maidservants that are Kananim. See, what we say is that it becomes consecrated. And it doesn't become free. It becomes consecrated, belongs to the hekdesh. That's what we have. We have a pasuk. A Rav can argue on a brisa, but he can't argue on a pasuk or on a drasha on a pasuk. Here it was different. Here he said that he's not consecrating the actual slave. Here he's consecrating the value of the slave, and that's why he's not free. It's just the value belongs to the hekdesh. The achi, once you've introduced this type of answer, that you can answer up a question like this by saying that it's referring to value and not referring to the actual slave. So why do you have to say that Rav argues on the brisa? Just say that brisa is talking about where he said lidmei for the value, and that's why he doesn't go free. Easy answer. Once he answered it for the pasuk, so he answered it also for the brisa. Where it says you can't. Yihachi, we have three problems with this. First of all, it says the caretakers of hekdesh cannot set him free. Of course, he can't set him free. He would never belong to them. Also, but they can sell him to others, and the others set them free. How do they sell him to others? He never owned it to sell it to others. Another question is, Rebbe says, person can pay his own money and then he goes free because it's as if the gizbar sold him to himself. It says Vila Dmei, but if he never belonged to the gizbar, it was only the value of him that was consecrated. What does it mean he's selling him to himself? He never owned him to sell him to himself. He only owned the value. Okay, so that's why we had to answer that Rebbe was arguing on the brisa, and the brisa was not referring to Dmei, to the value of it. The brisa was referring to that he was actually makdish the evet. He consecrated the evet. Tashema, come and listen. Makdish avdei, someone that consecrates a slave. The slave can still eat and can still do his work. In other words, if the slave is consecrated because the master made him hekdesh, so if that would be the case, then everything that the slave does now becomes the work of hekdesh and should belong to hekdesh. So how does the slave work and then get his food if everything that the slave now does automatically belongs to? So he says it's not a problem because he really only consecrated his value. He didn't really consecrate the actual slave. Gemara says Hamani Reb Meiri. No. That is the opinion of Reb Meir. What is the opinion of Reb Meir? We have another case where someone says, there's something called Erechen. In Erechen, you can consecrate the value of someone based on their age. The difference between if it's a man or a woman and what the age, there's age brackets that different values. There's a whole Gemara on it. Now, if one of the brackets that does not have a value is under 1 month old. So if someone says he's giving the erech of a baby that's under a month old, does he have to give anything? There's no erech for that age. So maybe he doesn't have to give anything. Reb Meir's was the opinion that since a person would never say anything that was insignificant, it's a very respectful human speech. If he said something, he obviously means something. So he must have meant that he's going to give its value as a slave, not the erech value, but a different value. Because Hamani Reb Meir, we're following the view of Reb Meir that says that a person would never say something that had no meaning. He must have meant something that was meaningful, and therefore he meant to say damav, its value. So too, when a person is makdish, his slave, he didn't actually mean nothing. He didn't mean that he's sanctifying the slave. He means he's sanctifying the value of the slave, because that would actually have significance, and therefore he's going to have to give its value to hektish.
It's a case where they didn't mention Dhamma.
Even though he didn't mention damav, but Rabbi Meir holds that we must say that he means damav because of Eina Damaitzi.
What's the case that an under 30 days old baby would be an Evid?
Over there is talking about where he consecrates. He says the erech, the value of the erech is a certain type of value. It's the value of a baby, and under 1 month, which over there does not really have an erech. So he must have meant something else. So what did he mean? He must have meant demei, which is a different type of value, which is the way if it be sold as a slave.
Why in other areas also is this within 30 days, which we treated differently, like the cost of something?
They're not really sure that if it's alive under 30 days.
So you not wait till we get 31 days to say, oh, mazel tov, yeah, baby.
Circumcised slave. Child like that.
I think so.
So he's alive.
Yeah.
No, because one of the parents is strong and healthy, and the other parents also, you don't know if it's going to be like the strong one or the weak one.
Yeah,
It
but I
has
mean,
no
No.
8
value
days
yet.
old,
It has
8
zero
days
value.
within their bris,
Right.
we're bringing their,
Right.
it's a
Kindergarten,
match
that's what we're
sheet.
talking about.
Right. Yeah. It's true.
Geez, what did
He
you?
said the Levi is counted from 30 days old. That's the age when it's considered viable. Okay, so the Gemara says, it's also logical to say that this is the opinion of Reb Meir. What's happening here is that the opinion of Reb Meir is that we're able to say that anything that has no other meaning, we're going to reinterpret to give it some meaning.
Just so it won't be.
Just so it won't be nothing. It says it. So Hachanam Mistaber the Ktani Sefer, because if you read further, the Chenu Shektish Atzmai, if a person is makdish himself, he can still continue to. This is a person that's not a slave, right? The person can go to work and he can eat. Obviously, he only meant his value. If we say that it's Reb Meir Shaper, then it makes sense that he was makdish's value because what he said was meaningless. And so we have to put some meaning into his words. So we say what he meant was his value. So Rabbanan, but if we say it's the opinion of the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan say that people do say things that are meaningless. Now, if that's the case, if he was consecrating his slave, so that could actually have meaning. And a slave he actually owns. We can say that he meant the value of the slave, and that's what he meant. So then good. He actually meant the value. But if it's this person, but if it's the person himself that's not a slave, does he have a value? He's not a slave. He has no value. So it must be that we're following the opinion of Reb Meir. What Reb Meir does is even if it's not in the words itself, not something that could be interpreted, but nevertheless we still interpret it even though it doesn't fit at all.
But if the guy goes on himself, we don't.
So if it's Reb Meir, then good, even though it doesn't fit at all that he should have an actual value. So, but nevertheless, we'll interpret it like that because we don't want him to say something that's meaningless. But if it's not Reb Meir, if it's the Rabbanan, we'll say, okay, what he said was meaningless and finished. Let's say that this is a machlekes tanaim.
Do we think like that today?
That people say meaningless things.
Yeah, do we admit that that's meaningless, or do you really give it a interpretation you think he really meant to say, but he wouldn't dare say?
That's a good question.
Me, I mean, you and me, and
You're not
You see.
supposed to look for chumras. You're supposed to look for it. So the abundant here are more machmir. You don't have to.
This sounds like a couple arguing. But you said this, but you said. So, well, that's not what I meant.
You
So
should have said.
obviously you must have meant something because, okay. Lema ketanai, hamakdish avdei, someone that consecrates a slave, ein mayalim bay. There's no me'ila. Me'ila means that if someone has personal benefit from something that belongs to the temple, he has to bring a carbon, he has to pay an extra fifth of its value, a whole bunch of halachas. So if someone consecrates a slave, he doesn't have to go through that whole process of bringing the sacrifice and all of that. If he then goes and uses the slave, right? Because he wasn't allowed to use something that belonged to Ekdesh. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, Ma'ilim Besare. There is me'ila on the hair of the slave. Okay. The Gemara is going to explain. My lab is it not that this is the machlekes? The Mar Savar Kadesh, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, he says that he becomes consecrated, and that's why there's me'ila in the hair. Why it's not me'ila in the rest of it? If you take the hair and make it into a sheitel, there's me'ila. I mean, you used it for personal use. Maybe it made it into a pillow. Mar Savar Le Kadesh. And the other one says, which is the Tanakama, says that he doesn't become hektish. That's why there's no me'ila. The Gemara says, "V'tizbera hay mayalim bay v'ain mayalim bay hay kadosh v'eina kadosh mi bayalei." If you wanted to say that the machlekes here, does a slave become hektish or not? Does a slave become consecrated when you consecrate it? Then you shouldn't have said anything to do with if it's me'ila or not me'ila. You should have said, is it hektish or is it not hektish? Me'ila is what happens after you've used it and all of that. It's a separate halacha. Ella, rather, the kuli al makadosh, everyone must hold that a slave does become kodesh. In the machlekes between the Tanakama, first opinion in Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is slightly different. Tanakama holds that a slave is like land, and the rule by land is that there's no me'ila on land. Mar Sava, the other one holds kimitatli dami, that a slave is like movable property.
This also applies to maidservant?
This applies to an eved or a shifcha.
Isn't there a pasuk that says "Le'sovi yeshan zayne mechir kele beis Hashem lekecha"?
I was going to say the same thing, Chaim.
Yeah, how does that come in? You're saying, that's referring to a carbon, right? You can't bring one of those items as a carbon here.
Once it's hektish, you could use it for a korban.
No, once it's hektish, you can be makdish something, and therefore
The Beis HaMikdash could decide to use it for a korban.
no, but not if it has a mum, not if it's esnan.
I know, but the money that you give for hektish, they could use it for korban.
Yeah, they can transfer that money to something else.
But you can't. A shifcha, you can't use it for a korban.
Yeah, no, we're not doing the shifcha as a carbon. The question is the shifcha considered hektish? Like, well, it had different ramifications.
But once it's hektish, you could use it for a korban.
No, two types.
It says mechir kelev. It's not talking about the actual. It's talking about the value of a kelev or a zayna. So that's a shifcha included.
No, mechir kelev means that when you take a sheep and you switch it for a dog, so it's an actual carbon, or esnan zayna, or if there was a payment for a prostitute that was an animal, that can't be used for a carbon. Yeah, that's specifically a carbon. I think what the hektish can own, that you can give whatever, anything to hektish, and then hektish would sell it and use the money for the bedek habayis. Over here also, we're not talking about a carbon here, we're talking about also bedek habayis. So we're talking about the eved has a value, right? And the shifcha, if it would be a shifcha, has a value. The question is, if someone takes what was just consecrated and uses it, has personal benefit from it, is there me'ila on that? So we say that it's a machlekes, and it depends. What's the machlekes dependent on? If we compare it to land or if we compare it to metaltlin. This is based on also on if you make an oath. There's another gemara of you're not allowed to make. We don't administer oaths for property. We only administer oaths for metaltlin, for personality. So do you make an oath over on an evet? I think it's machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva and another gemara. Okay. Ihachi, if that's the case, that the question is if it's considered property or if it's considered personality, instead of arguing about the here, why don't you argue about the body itself? Same machlekes. Rather, we're readjusting what the machlekes is. Everyone holds an eved is similar to property. I forget who it was, Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Kiva that says that. And we're talking about here that's long enough to be shaved. Mar savar kegaz is dummy. Here that's meant to be cut, is it considered that it's cut already? Mar savar lav kegaz is dummy, and the other opinion holds that it's not considered like it's cut. Question is, what does it mean if it's cut? If it's considered removed, then that's not considered attached to the ground, and it's considered regular hektish where there would be me'ila on. The question is, do we consider it attached or detached?
They selling it here?
Yeah, if you're going to take the hair and sell it, or use it for whatever, something else. Okay, it's a good son. Lema hani tanai kahani tanai. This is interesting. Gemara says maybe these tanaim that you just mentioned, the Tanakam and Shimon ben Gamliel, follow another group of tanaim. The Tanan was taught in the Mishnah. The Meir says there are certain things that are similar to the ground, which means they're attached to the ground, but nevertheless they don't have that halacha. The halacha is that they're not considered part of the ground. And the sages don't agree. The sages say that if they're attached to the ground, they're considered part of the ground. Ketzad, what would be an example of this machlekes? Someone says, I gave you grapevines to watch. You're supposed to watch 10 grapevines. See, here's the prompt.
I think you said vines.
Oh, how do you know I'm in
Vines.
too?
See the vine, here's the vine, the stem.
That's divine.
Divine, right?
I haven't seen advertised grape. I would assume that grape juice or something would use to advertise straight from the vine. And I haven't seen that.
Write it down.
Why don't they use that?
Write it
De
down.
Beers.
Yeah. Write it down.
Go ahead.
And then what happens?
We'll sell it. We'll sell it.
Real grapes in the bar.
Okay.
Yeah, muscadine.
That could be a good brand name for it.
No, that won't work.
Okay. 10 grapevines I gave to you to watch. She said you only gave me 5 to watch. I don't know what happened to them. Maybe they got cut down or something. Oh, they ate all the grapes off it. Well, Reb Meir Mechayev. Reb Meir says that he has to make a shavua of a maida b'miktas. He has to take an oath whenever someone denies half of the claim, then he has to make a shavua. Reb Meir says he has to make a shavua. Chum say no, the vine is attached to the ground. So anything that's attached to the ground, you don't make an oath on. You can't make a shvua on that. So you don't make an oath. So what are we seeing over here? We're seeing of Rabbi Yossi by Chanina. Rabbi Yossi by Chanina says that's a later Amira in Eretz Yisrael. Another mindlessly batzer. We're talking about grapes that were ready to be to be harvested. The Reb Meir Savar Kibitzuris Damyan. That's why it's grapes. Reb Meir says it's considered harvested already, even though it's not harvested, but it's like it's been harvested. And therefore, you can make an oath on it. It's considered detached. Rabbanan Savi, the Rabbanan say, Lav Kibitzuris Damyan. It's not considered Bitzuris. It's not considered detached. Okay, so we have the machlekes between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is really the same machlekes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim, where Reb Meir holds that anything that's attached is, just because it's attached to the ground, does not mean that it's part of the ground, because it could be that it's considered like it's separated. So Reb Meir would hold like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, that the hair is considered separate from the person because it was ready to be cut off. So to the grapes, because they were ready to be harvested, are considered separated. The Gemara says no. Afilu tema Reb Meir. You could say that Reb Meir really holds like the Tanakama regarding the hair, not like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Because Ad can like Reb Meir Hassam. When did Reb Meir say over there that the grapes are considered detached? Elabanavim the kama the kaim and michashe. Because as long as it stays on the vine, it gets worse. You have to detach it right away. So therefore it's considered like detached already. Aval hacha, but over here with the hair, kama the koya shpuchim mashpach. The more you let the hair grow, the better it gets, not the worse it gets. So we can say the mayor would say that the hair is considered attached. The grapes are considered detached.
Yeah, so what does it mean it's ready to cut?
Big enough to cut. Haircut time.
Same, it's red enough to cut, yeah.
As soon as it grows.
Erase that from the table.
Ki salak Rab Chia bar Yosef amala shmaita the Rav made the Rabbi Yochanan. Rab Chia bar Yosef went up to Eretz Yisrael. He said what the statement of Rav in front of Rabbi Yochanan. What did Rav say? Rav says that if someone is mafkir his eved, that was the version of Rab Chia bar Alvin. No, that was the version of Rabbi Yosef. That hamafkir avda, someone that makes his slave ownerless, the slave goes free. Amar lei, so Rabbi Yochanan says, Amar Rav hachi. Rav really said that, like he says in surprise. The Gemara asks, Who lai Amar hachi? Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold that. Rabbi Yochanan also holds that. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hamafkir avda yatzalachir, so tzarich get shecher. Exactly you had a problem with Rav saying that someone that makes a slave ownerless, he goes free. Why do you have a problem with that? That's exactly what you hold. It says Hachi Kamalei. I'm a Rav Kavasi. We meant Rav holds like me. Not that I have a problem with him holding that. I was just surprised that he holds but the same thing that I hold. Ikadamri, there are those that say Leisimua Kamei, that he didn't complete the statement. And what happened was Amar Lei, V'layama Rav Tzarech Get Shicher. Rav didn't say that you need a document. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the slave goes free, but you still need a document. And Rabbi Yochanan Latamei, and Rabbi Yochanan follows his logic. Amarula, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Ula says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Amafkir Avdei, someone that makes a slave ownerless, Yetzilachir Shvitzarach Get Shicher, slave goes free, but he also needs a document. Kigufa. Amarula, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We learned before that Ula says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Amafkir Avdei, someone that makes a slave. He makes a slave ownerless. Yatzalacheres, the slave is free. But when it comes time for the slave to get married, we say, sorry, you can't get married until you have the document. Tzarech get shecher. Exactly like a get. Tzarech get shecher, you need the document, the deed of manumission. Eisur Rababa Ula. Rababa asks Ula a question. Ger Shemeis, there's a convert that passed away.
How many times they give a slave a concubine too?
Yeah, that would be as a slave. The slave is not yet Jewish. Slave can live with a maid servant. Maid. No. Why do you think Rababa is Rav? Okay. and considered a Tana, right? Yeah, but his real name was Rababa, but he's never called Rababa in the Gemara. Sometimes he's called, Shmuel calls him Abba Amar Hachi. Abba said this, but is not in the way that the Gemara quotes him. It's not him. So Esri Rababa Ula.
Yes.
Ula was a little
Shmuel
later.
was his contemporary. He's not going to call him.
Right. Rababa says to Ula, Gershom Mace, the convert passed away. Bizu Yisrael Nechasav. And some Jewish people came in and they took all his property. And amongst them were slaves. Bein Gedel and Bein Ketanim. Whether they were, you see, when the convert passed away, there are no inheritors because the convert passed away without single. So, no, if someone steals from a convert, then the person wants to repay the money. So who does he repay it to? That goes to a Kohen. But here, no one stole it. He just passed away. And so it becomes ownerless. So there are slaves there. So Bein Gedolim, Bein Ketanim, Kanu Atzman, B'nei Chayrin. The slaves acquire themselves because slaves that are made ownerless go free, right? So Rab said.
As you marked before, yeah.
And Rabbi Yochanan said this. Abishal says, Gedolim Kanu Atzman, B'nei Chayrin. The ones that were adults, they actually acquired themselves because they acquire themselves before anyone else comes and grabs them, right? Ketanim, but the children, the slaves that are children, anyone that wants can come and take them. Gemara, so Rababa asks to Ula, according to you, that you're quoting in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that the slave goes free, but they still require a deed of manumission. What do you mean they go free? Who's going to write the document? The only way they can go free when they're hefker is with the document. So who's going to write the document? They don't even have an owner to write a document. Amar. So Ula says, this fellow that just spoke to me, he's comparable to someone that like never learned anything in his life, never went to yeshiva. Time am I? What's the reason? Why is he making a comment like that? Amar Rav Nachman says, because Ula holds Avdai the ger ki ishtai, that the slave of a convert is just like the convert's wife. Ma ishtai mishtalcha b'lei get. Who gives the wife a get after the slave dies? Anyone? No. She goes free without a get. She's a widow. Afavad mishtalcha b'lei get. So also the slaves go free without a get. Yachi Fil Yisrael Nami. Why does this not apply when a Jew passes away? Why only by a ger? Because they get passed on with an inheritance. They don't go free like that. Yachi, if that's the case, there was
no inheritance. That's the whole point.
By a ger, there's no inheritance.
That's why it's a unique case.
Right. We say if that's the case, if someone that makes his slave free, umeis, and then the owner passed away, nami alama amar ameimar, the same thing should apply. Why did ameimar say mafker avdi umeis eiseverein letakana? That there's no resolution for that evet because there's no one to write him a document. When it says ameimar kasha, that's a kasha on ameimar. You don't really need a document there. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baridi, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Halacha Kabashol. Rabbi Yaakov Baridi says in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi that halacha is like Abashol, and Abashol says that there's a difference between adult slaves and children slaves. Amar le Rab Zera le Rabbi Yaakov Baridi. Rab Zera says to Rabbi Yaakov Baridi, Shmielach, did you hear this from Rabbi Shua ben Levi himself? Or did you derive it from something that happened and that's what you understood? Okay. Rabbi Shua, my klala, what could have Rabbi Shua ben Levi said? What was the scenario? What was the case that happened and that you derived from it? Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, Amar lefanei Rebbe, they said in front of Rebbe, Amar, if a person says, Nisyayashti mi pleni avdi, I've given up hope from ever getting back that slave. Mahu, what's the din? Amalehem, Rebbe said, that I say, ain't like takana ela b'shtar. He still has to write him a document. So,
To be miyash.
to set him free. Yeah, it still needs a document, even though Yush is a type of hefker. Yush is basically like making ownerless. I've given up hope means, okay, so now it's ownerless. Nevertheless, you still have to write the document. Rabbi Yechanan says, my time with the Rebbe.
So the page before were the whole discussion of the slave that the owner was not miyash yet. He did, or was miyash, was doing an interim that he had not written any document.
Yeah.
Because had he written the
Document, then he would have been free anyway.
How could he have given up hope of requiring it? I mean, it's not like a phone that can speak into my owner is like a slave. The slave can always say I belong to this.
Because the marauders had bad guys.
Didn't get out of bed. He didn't work, so you gave up on him. Doesn't mean he was lost. Gave up on him. Gave up on him because he didn't perform.
I thought he like ran away or was captured or something like that. That was my what I was imagining. And then the guy says, my house is a wreck. You know, I better go get the new slave. It's about the old one. Forget about it. It's a lost case. Forget it. I have to hire a new one. So, okay, so now it's the real Yish, right?
He crossed the this
Underground Railroad.
How could you
Right.
give a star if he's not around?
What you would do is you would write a document and you would give it to someone else to acquire on his behalf, I guess. I guess. Can you, does the slave, we had a machlekes before, if you can give it on his behalf. We said he would rather be a slave. He would, if the slave would rather, we said before that he can't do that because the slave would rather stay a slave than be free.
So it wasn't,
But that's only a slave that didn't run away.
Otherwise, he'd be
Or
alive.
maybe a slave that ran away or something wants to be free. Because why did we want this? Why did the slave want to be a slave? Because he can have more benefits by being with a shifcha than with someone that's free. If he's a slave, he can be with a shifcha. A free person.
great idea.
Okay, whatever the case is. So,
A lot of slaves were allowed to go free, but they wanted to stay with the same owner.
right. Amalahem, Amani ain't like to kanal b'shtar. Rabbi Yechanan, my time with the Rebbe. Rabbi Yechanan says, what's Rebbe's explanation? Gamar lo lami isha, he learns from a wife. Ma isha b'shtar, af evanami b'shtar. Just like the only way that a woman can go free from her husband is if she gets a divorce paper. So too by the Eved, the kadaikas minei kiisha. And now we imply from that, just like a wife. Ma isha yisura v'lei mamaina, af evanami yisura v'lei mamaina. So there's two parts to this. There's one part of the slave going free is that there's two parts to this ownership of the slave. One part is that the slave, it's a monetary issue. Who owns the slave? Other part of the ownership of the slave is that while the slave is owned, there's a ritual issue. And that is that the slave is considered partially Jewish, not fully Jewish. When the slave goes free, then the slave becomes fully Jewish. So we're going to say like this, that the adult slave, the monetary part, the adult acquires himself. The monetary part, right? When the master dies, the monetary part is automatically the adult acquired, Abishal's opinion. The adult slaves acquire themselves. Only thing is that you have to write a document for the ritual aspect of this, that the slave should become Jewish. You know, But the children slaves, that even the monetary part is not resolved. And so what we're saying over here is, since Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that he said in front of Rebbe that the woman needs to go free with the document, right? And so what we're going to understand from this is that the woman goes free. She goes free as a ritual aspect. That's not a monetary aspect of her going free. So therefore, we would understand from that is that when it comes to the adult slave, yes, it's the same thing. The adult slave, you need the document, but by the child slave, not. The Gemara says, so what? It sounds like you figured out that if Rabbi Shua ben Levi is saying this in the name of Rebbe, that's exactly what Abba Shaul would hold. The halacha is like Abba Shaul. Why is there a problem if he didn't hear it directly? If he only heard it, he's only implying it from another statement of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Amalei Adarabba says, no, on the contrary. Duk mine li'idachki, so you can say it exactly the opposite. Ma isha ben gedola ben ketana, just like by a woman, if the
Needs a star.
whether adult, whether it's she's an adult or a child, af eved nami ben gadol ben katan. The same thing should apply by an eved. A get, right? Amalei, so he responded before Shmielei. I heard it directly. It wasn't something that I heard that I implied. I actually heard him say that the halacha is like Abba Shaul. Okay, now we have the same Gemara, just in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Chia bar Amar Rabbi Yechanan ain't halacha Abba Shaul. Exactly the opposite, though. That the halacha is not like Abba Shaul. Amalei Rab Zeir Rab Chia bar Abba before Shmielei. Rab Chia bar Abba was the main student of Rabbi Yechanan. Before Shmielach and Mechlala Shmielach. Did you hear it directly, or did you hear it from something that you implied? My klala. What was implied? Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Lefnei Rabbi Nisiyasin Pleni Abdi Mao, Amalhem Imarani, and it's kind of Bishtar, but Rabbi Yechon, my time with Rabbi Gamalala Mishamesh Bishtar, Fevadam Bishtar. So you see that the slave is compared to the woman. The woman needs a document. The slave also needs a document. Kadaikas Minaki Shemesh Ben Gedel Ben Katana. This is Rabbi Yechon's view, and you were going to imply that the woman needs a document as a get. A divorce, whether she's an adult or a child. So also the Eved would need also a divorce, a get, emancipation, manumission, whether it's adult or a child, not like Abba Shaul. The Gemara says, V'imachlalamaya, looks very good. You have a good proof. The Gemara says, Adarabba, say it exactly the opposite. You're missing one aspect. By the wife, it's only prohibition. It's not money. But the Eved, it would only be by the adult slaves, not by the younger slaves, because by the adult slaves, they acquire themselves, the young slaves, the children, someone would have to acquire them. So Amalei b'feir Shmi, I heard it directly. Okay, let's leave it over here.
And it's so nice to have Josh Green here. You need any buildings?
The Lashon Omer Ani, is that the common language?
I mean, yeah, I never see it. I only see it by Rebbe. Rebbe says it sometimes.
Any commentary on why he would say such a
I got to look that up.
party? Yeah,
I got
curious.
it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
interesting. Okay.